The morning sun cast long shadows across the polished floors of Chicago O'Hare International Airport as the Richardson family made their way through the bustling terminal. What started as a dream vacation to celebrate 15 years of marriage would soon become a nightmare that would expose the ugly truth about discrimination in the airline industry and trigger a response that would shake the aviation world to its core. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dr. Jasmine Richardson adjusted the strap of her designer carry-on bag as she walked alongside her husband Marcus and their 3 children. At 42, she commanded respect in every room she entered, her presence both elegant and authoritative. Her natural hair was styled in an intricate updo, and despite the early morning hour, she looked impeccable in her tailored blazer and crisp white shirt. What the bustling crowd around her didn't know was that Dr. Richardson held one of the most powerful positions in commercial aviation, a secret that would soon change everything. Marcus Richardson, a successful orthopedic surgeon, held the hand of their youngest daughter, 8-year-old Zoe, whose bright yellow sundress matched her infectious smile. Their middle child, 12-year-old Cameron, walked beside his father, his new camera hanging around his neck, eager to document their first family trip to Hawaii. 15-year-old Destiny led the group, her confidence evident in every step as she navigated through the airport with the ease of someone wise beyond her years. The family had been planning this trip for months. It was meant to be a celebration of Marcus and Jasmine's wedding anniversary. But more importantly, it was a rare opportunity for the entire family to disconnect from their busy lives and spend quality time together. Marcus had cleared his surgery schedule. The children had arranged to miss a week of school, and Jasmine had delegated her responsibilities at work, though few people knew the true extent of what those responsibilities entailed. As they approached the departure gate for Flight 847 to Honolulu, the energy in the terminal was typical for a Saturday morning. Families with excited children, business travelers checking their phones, and vacation-goers laden with beach gear and oversized sun hats filled the waiting area. The gate area buzzed with anticipation as passengers began gathering for what promised to be a routine 5-hour flight to paradise. The Richardson family found seats together near the large windows overlooking the tarmac. Zoe pressed her face against the glass, watching the ground crew prepare their aircraft, a Boeing 777 that would carry them across the continent and over the Pacific Ocean. Cameron was already taking pictures, documenting the beginning of what he hoped would be an epic adventure. Destiny scrolled through her phone, showing her parents photos of the resort where they would be staying. "Look at this infinity pool," Destiny said, tilting her screen toward her mother. "It overlooks the ocean." Jasmine smiled, feeling a rare moment of complete relaxation. Her work demanded constant attention, strategic thinking, and split-second decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions of passengers. But here, surrounded by her family and anticipating a week of nothing but beach walks, snorkeling, and quality time together, she allowed herself to simply be a wife and mother. Marcus squeezed her hand. "No work calls this week," he reminded her with a knowing smile. "I promise," she replied, though they both knew that completely disconnecting from her responsibilities would be nearly impossible. Still, she was determined to try. The gate agent, a woman in her 30s with short blonde hair and tired eyes, began making preliminary announcements about the boarding process. Flight 847 was on time, and passengers were asked to have their boarding passes and identification ready. The Richardson family checked their documents one final time, ensuring everything was in order for their journey. As they waited, other families around them shared similar scenes of anticipation. Children asked their parents endless questions about flying, teenagers complained about having to put their phones in airplane mode, and couples discussed their vacation plans in excited whispers. The atmosphere was filled with the kind of positive energy that comes with the promise of adventure and new experiences. Zoe had fallen asleep against her father's shoulder when the first boarding announcement was made. Priority passengers and first-class travelers were invited to board, followed by families with young children. Marcus gently woke Zoe, and the Richardson family gathered their belongings, ready to begin their vacation. They joined the line of passengers slowly making their way toward the jet bridge. Destiny helped her younger sister organize her small backpack filled with coloring books and travel games. Cameron checked his camera battery one more time, ensuring he wouldn't miss capturing any moments of their trip. Marcus and Jasmine walked behind their children, enjoying the simple pleasure of watching their family's excitement. The boarding process was moving smoothly when they reached the gate podium. Jasmine handed over their boarding passes to the gate agent, the same tired-looking woman who had been making announcements. The agent scanned the passes one by one, pausing slightly when she reached the fourth pass. "Excuse me," the agent said, looking up at the family with a puzzled expression. "These seats aren't together." Marcus leaned forward. "That's not right. We specifically requested seats together when we booked. It's our family vacation." The agent stared at her computer screen, clicking through several pages. "I'm showing that your family has been separated. The children are in different rows, and you and your wife are in separate sections entirely." Jasmine felt a knot forming in her stomach. There must be some mistake. We booked these seats months ago, and we confirmed our seating arrangement just yesterday when we checked in online. The gate agent's expression remained neutral, almost indifferent. "I'm sorry, but this is what the system shows. The flight is completely full, so there's nothing I can do to change it now." "But our youngest is only 8 years old," Marcus explained, his voice remaining calm but firm. "She can't sit by herself on a 5-hour flight." "Sir, children that age sit alone all the time," the agent replied dismissively. "She'll be fine." Destiny stepped forward, her teenage confidence evident. "Can't you at least put the adults near the kids? This doesn't make sense." The agent barely glanced at her. "Miss, I don't make the seating arrangements. The computer assigns the seats, and that's final." Other passengers in line behind them began shifting impatiently, checking their watches and sighing loudly. The pressure to move quickly was mounting, but the Richardson family wasn't about to board a 5-hour flight with their 8-year-old daughter sitting alone among strangers. Jasmine's professional instincts kicked in. Years of managing complex situations and dealing with difficult personalities had taught her to remain composed under pressure, but she could feel her maternal protective instincts rising to the surface. "Is there a supervisor available?" she asked politely but firmly. "This is clearly an error that needs to be corrected." The gate agent looked annoyed by the request. "Ma'am, we have a plane to board. If you don't like your seat assignments, you can speak to the flight attendants once you're on board, but right now, you need to move along." The dismissive tone and the clear message that their concerns didn't matter struck a nerve. Marcus and Jasmine exchanged glances, both recognizing that something wasn't right about this situation. In all their years of traveling, they had never encountered such inflexibility, especially when it involved keeping a family together. What none of them could have predicted was that this seemingly simple seating issue was about to spiral into something much larger, something that would expose ugly truths about discrimination and force a reckoning that would reverberate throughout the entire airline industry. As the Richardson family stood at the gate, unsure of their next move, they had no idea that within minutes, their vacation would be forgotten, their faith in fair treatment would be shattered, and the true power of Dr. Jasmine Richardson would be revealed in ways that would make headlines across the nation. The tension at Gate 47 thickened as more passengers gathered behind the Richardson family, their impatience growing by the minute. Jasmine could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on them, some sympathetic, others clearly annoyed by the delay. She maintained her composure, but inside, alarm bells were ringing. "Listen," Marcus said, his voice steady but with an edge that his family recognized as barely contained frustration. "We're not asking for first-class upgrades or special treatment. We just want to sit near our children on this flight. Surely there's someone who would be willing to switch seats." The gate agent, whose name tag read Patricia Kellerman, shook her head without even looking at her screen again. "Sir, I've already explained that the flight is completely full. Every seat is assigned, and passengers have specifically chosen their locations. I can't force people to move." Destiny, mature beyond her 15 years, stepped closer to the counter. "Ma'am, with all due respect, airlines move people around all the time for operational reasons. My little sister is 8 years old. She gets scared on flights, and she's never flown without sitting next to one of us." Patricia barely acknowledged the teenager's words. "Young lady, children fly alone every day. Your sister will be fine. Now, I need you all to either board the aircraft or step aside so other passengers can board." Cameron, who had been quietly observing the interaction while clutching his camera, spoke up. "Why can't you just call someone who might want to switch? I bet lots of people would move if you just asked over the intercom." "Because that's not how we do things," Patricia snapped, her patience clearly wearing thin. "The computer assigns seats for a reason, and I don't have time to negotiate with every passenger who doesn't like where they're sitting." An older gentleman behind them in line cleared his throat loudly. "Excuse me, but some of us have connections to make. Can you please resolve this quickly?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Jasmine turned slightly, offering the man a polite nod, then faced Patricia again. "I understand you have procedures, but separating a family with young children seems like exactly the kind of situation where those procedures should be flexible. Can you please call your supervisor?" "Ma'am, I am the supervisor for this gate," Patricia replied, her tone growing more defensive. "And I'm telling you that there's nothing more I can do. You can either board the flight with your assigned seats, or you can miss your flight. Those are your options." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. In his 15 years as a surgeon, he had dealt with countless high-pressure situations, life-and-death decisions that required immediate action and clear thinking. But this situation was different. This felt personal and wrong in a way that made his chest burn with indignation. "Let me understand this correctly," he said, his voice carrying the authority he used in operating rooms. "You're telling us that on a plane with over 200 seats, there's absolutely no way to seat a family together, even when that family includes an 8-year-old child?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you," Patricia responded, crossing her arms. "Now, are you boarding or not?" Zoe tugged on her mother's blazer. "Mommy, are we not going on vacation?" The innocent question from their youngest daughter hit Jasmine like a physical blow. She knelt down to Zoe's level, smoothing her daughter's curly hair. "We're going to figure this out, baby. Don't worry." But as she stood back up, Jasmine's professional instincts were screaming that something was fundamentally wrong with this entire interaction. She had traveled extensively for business, had been on hundreds of flights, and had never encountered such rigid inflexibility, especially when it involved child safety and family unity. "Patricia," she said, reading the woman's name tag deliberately, "I need you to understand something. We're not difficult passengers. We're not asking for anything unreasonable. We're asking for basic accommodation that any responsible airline would provide to keep a family together. What you're suggesting puts our children at risk and creates an unsafe situation." Patricia's expression hardened further. "Ma'am, if you're not comfortable with our seating arrangements, then perhaps you should have chosen a different airline. We can't cater to every passenger's special requests." The word "special" hung in the air with a particular venom that made several nearby passengers shift uncomfortably. Destiny caught her parents' eyes, her expression showing that she too had heard the underlying tone in the gate agent's voice. A woman with 2 young children who had been standing behind them stepped forward. "Excuse me, I couldn't help but overhear. I'm traveling alone with my kids, and we have 3 seats together in row 23. If it would help, I'd be happy to switch with some of your family members so you can sit closer together." The generous offer from the stranger filled Jasmine with gratitude, but before she could respond, Patricia intervened sharply. "Ma'am, I appreciate the gesture, but once boarding passes are issued, we can't make changes. The manifest is final, and switching seats causes delays and confusion for the flight crew." The helpful passenger looked confused, but "I've switched seats on flights many times before. Usually, the gate agents are happy to help facilitate that." "Not on my watch," Patricia replied firmly. "We follow procedures here, and the procedures state that seat assignments are final." Marcus stepped closer to the counter, his surgical precision now focused entirely on the woman in front of him. "I'd like to see these procedures you keep referencing in writing, and I'd like to speak to someone above you in the airline hierarchy." Patricia's face flushed slightly. "Sir, I've already told you that I'm the supervisor for this gate. There's no one else to speak to right now, and I don't have to show you internal company procedures." "Actually, you do," Jasmine said quietly, her voice carrying a subtle authority that made Patricia pause. "Airline policies regarding passenger accommodation, especially those involving child safety, are regulated by federal guidelines. Passengers have a right to understand the policies that affect their travel." For the first time since the interaction began, Patricia looked uncertain. I don't carry policy manuals with me at the gate." "Then perhaps," Jasmine continued, her tone remaining calm but gaining intensity, "you should call someone who does have access to those policies. Because what you're describing doesn't align with standard industry practices for family travel." The passengers behind them had grown quiet, many now openly watching the exchange with interest rather than impatience. Several were recording with their phones, sensing that they were witnessing something significant. Cameron whispered to his sister, "Mom's using her work voice." Destiny nodded, recognizing the subtle shift in their mother's demeanor. They had seen this transformation before, though never in a situation like this. When Dr. Jasmine Richardson shifted into professional mode, things happened. Patricia seemed to sense the change as well, though she couldn't quite identify what was different. The woman standing before her looked the same, but there was something in her posture, her tone, and her unwavering gaze that suggested this was not someone who would simply accept no as a final answer. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one more time to either board the aircraft or step aside," Patricia said, but her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Jasmine looked at her family, then back at the gate agent. The moment had arrived when a decision had to be made. Accept the unacceptable treatment and board the flight with their families scattered throughout the aircraft, or take a stand that would have consequences none of them could yet imagine. "No," Jasmine said simply. "We're not boarding under these conditions, and we're not stepping aside. We're going to resolve this properly, right here, right now." The die was cast. What had started as a simple seating issue was about to become something much larger, something that would test every principle the Richardson family held dear and expose truths that the airline industry had long tried to keep hidden. The standoff at Gate 47 had drawn the attention of nearly everyone in the waiting area. Passengers lowered their magazines and looked up from their phones, sensing that something significant was unfolding. The energy in the space had shifted from typical pre-flight anticipation to something electric and uncomfortable. Patricia Kellerman's face had grown increasingly red as she realized that the Richardson family wasn't going to simply comply with her demands. She glanced around nervously, aware that dozens of people were now openly watching the confrontation, many with their phones pointed in her direction. "Ma'am, if you refuse to board, I'll have to call security," Patricia threatened, her voice higher than before. "You're disrupting the boarding process and causing delays for other passengers." Jasmine remained perfectly still, her posture straight and her expression calm. "By all means, call security. I'd like them to witness this interaction and hear your explanation for why you're refusing to make reasonable accommodations for a family with young children." The confident response caught Patricia off guard. Most passengers, when threatened with security, would either comply immediately or become flustered and defensive. This woman was doing neither. Instead, she seemed almost welcoming the escalation. Marcus stepped slightly closer to his wife, not in a protective manner, but in solidarity. He had seen Jasmine in boardrooms, had watched her navigate complex negotiations with government officials and international partners. The woman standing beside him now was the same person who had earned respect from some of the most powerful people in the aviation industry. "Patricia," Jasmine said, her voice taking on a different quality, one that commanded attention, "before you make that call, I want you to think very carefully about what's happening here. You've had multiple opportunities to resolve this situation professionally and courteously. Instead, you've chosen to be inflexible, dismissive, and frankly, discriminatory in your treatment of my family." "Discriminatory?" Patricia sputtered. "I treat all passengers the same way." "Do you?" Jasmine asked, tilting her head slightly. "Because I find it interesting that when Mrs. Henderson over there offered to help facilitate a seat change, you immediately shut down that option, claiming it was against policy. Yet I've personally witnessed gate agents at this very airport help passengers switch seats dozens of times." Patricia's eyes darted toward the woman with children who had made the generous offer earlier. That's different. Each situation is unique." "You're absolutely right," Jasmine agreed. "Each situation is unique." Which is exactly why rigid adherence to supposed policies, especially when those policies seem to apply selectively, raises serious questions about your decision-making process. A tall man in a pilot's uniform approached the gate area, drawn by the commotion. His 4 stripes indicated he was a captain, and his weathered face suggested decades of experience in commercial aviation. He paused near the counter, clearly trying to assess the situation. "Is there a problem here?" Captain Williams asked, his voice carrying the authority that came with being responsible for aircraft safety and passenger welfare. Patricia looked relieved at the intervention. "Captain, these passengers are refusing to board with their assigned seats. They're demanding seat changes that I can't accommodate, and they're holding up the boarding process." Captain Williams looked at the Richardson family, taking in the scene. 2 well-dressed parents, 3 children ranging from elementary age to teenager, all carrying themselves with dignity, despite the obvious stress of the situation. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked Jasmine directly. "Captain Williams," Jasmine said, reading his name tag. "We're traveling as a family to Hawaii for our anniversary celebration." When we arrived at the gate, we discovered that our seating assignments had been changed, separating our family across the aircraft. Our 8-year-old daughter has been assigned to sit alone, rows away from any family member. We've requested reasonable accommodation to keep our family together, but Ms. Kellerman has refused to even explore options. Captain Williams frowned. "Changed from what you originally booked?" "We had confirmed seats together when we checked in online yesterday," Marcus explained. "We have screenshots on our phones showing our original seat assignments." The pilot's expression grew more serious. "May I see those screenshots?" Marcus quickly pulled up the images on his phone, showing the original seating chart with the Richardson family clustered together in rows 15 and 16. Captain Williams studied the screen, then looked at Patricia. "What happened to these seat assignments?" Patricia's face grew pale. The system must have automatically reassigned them due to aircraft changes or operational requirements." "What aircraft changes?" Captain Williams asked sharply. "We're flying the same 777 that's been scheduled for this route all week, and I haven't been notified of any operational requirements that would necessitate separating families." The captain's questions were creating visible cracks in Patricia's confidence. She fumbled with her computer terminal, clicking through screens with increasing desperation. There must be, let me check with operations," she stammered. "No," Captain Williams said firmly. "I want to understand this right now. Show me the system records that explain why this family's seats were changed." Jasmine watched the interaction with growing interest. Captain Williams was asking exactly the right questions, demonstrating the kind of professional competence and concern for passenger welfare that she expected from airline personnel. It was a stark contrast to Patricia's behavior. As Patricia struggled with her computer, Jasmine made a decision. She reached into her purse and withdrew a business card, holding it discreetly in her hand. The time for patience was coming to an end. "Captain Williams," she said quietly, "I appreciate your intervention and your professionalism. It's exactly the kind of leadership and customer service that the aviation industry needs." There was something in her tone that made the captain look at her more closely. He had been flying for 28 years, had dealt with thousands of passengers, and had developed an instinct for reading people. The woman standing before him carried herself with a confidence and authority that suggested she was accustomed to being listened to and taken seriously. "Ma'am, I apologize for this situation," he said sincerely. "Family seating is a priority for us, especially when children are involved. Let me see what we can do to resolve this." He turned to Patricia, his expression stern. "I want you to pull up the original reservation and show me exactly when and why these seat assignments were changed." Patricia's hands were shaking slightly as she navigated through the airline's computer system. The original booking appeared on her screen, showing the Richardson family seats that Marcus had displayed on his phone. Then, she clicked to show the current assignments, which scattered the family throughout the aircraft. "There," she said weakly, pointing at the screen. "You can see that the system reassigned them." Captain Williams leaned in to examine the records more closely. What he saw made his jaw tighten. The seat changes hadn't been made by the system automatically. They had been made manually, just 2 hours earlier, by a gate agent with Patricia's employee ID. "Patricia," he said slowly, "these changes were made manually, by you, this morning." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Patricia's face went white, then red, then white again. Around them, passengers who had been straining to hear the conversation caught the captain's words, and a collective intake of breath rippled through the crowd. There must be some mistake," Patricia whispered. But there was no mistake, and everyone present knew it. The Richardson family had been deliberately separated, their vacation nearly ruined, by the intentional actions of a gate agent who had decided that this particular family didn't deserve to sit together. Jasmine felt a cold fury building in her chest. The time for diplomacy was over. The time for revelation had arrived. She stepped forward and handed Captain Williams her business card. When he read it, his eyes widened in shock, and the card nearly slipped from his fingers. Captain Williams stared at the business card in his hand, reading and rereading the elegant black text that seemed to shimmer under the harsh, fluorescent lights of the airport terminal. His 28 years of flying experience had prepared him for turbulence, mechanical failures, and medical emergencies at 30,000 feet, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The card read, Dr. Jasmine Richardson, Chief Executive Officer, Atlantic Airways Corporation. The blood drained from his face as the full magnitude of the situation crashed over him like a tsunami. Atlantic Airways wasn't just any airline. It was the parent company that owned the very carrier they were about to board. The woman standing before him, the woman whose family had just been subjected to deliberate discrimination by his gate agent, wasn't just a passenger. She was, quite literally, his ultimate boss. "Oh my God," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the ambient noise of the terminal. Patricia, still frantically clicking through computer screens trying to manufacture an explanation for her actions, looked up at the captain's pale face. "What? What's wrong?" Captain Williams handed the card back to Jasmine with trembling fingers, his pilot's training and crisis management completely abandoned in the face of this unprecedented situation. "Dr. Richardson, I had no idea. Ma'am, I am so incredibly sorry." The passengers nearby, who had been straining to understand what was happening, began to murmur among themselves. Those close enough to see the captain's shocked reaction sensed that something monumental had just occurred, though they couldn't yet grasp the full scope of it. Jasmine accepted her business card back with the same calm composure she had maintained throughout the entire ordeal. "Captain Williams, you have nothing to apologize for. Your professionalism and genuine concern for passenger safety and comfort have been exemplary. You've demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership we expect from our flight crews." Her words carried a weight now that they hadn't possessed moments before. This wasn't just a passenger complimenting a pilot. This was the CEO of a major aviation corporation acknowledging exemplary performance from one of her employees. Patricia, still oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred, looked between the captain and Jasmine with growing confusion. "I don't understand what's happening here. Who is this woman?" Captain Williams turned to face Patricia, his expression a mixture of professional disappointment and personal mortification. "Patricia, this is Dr. Jasmine Richardson. She's the Chief Executive Officer of Atlantic Airways Corporation." The words hit Patricia like a physical blow. The computer mouse slipped from her hand, clattering onto the counter. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound emerged. The woman she had dismissed, belittled, and deliberately discriminated against wasn't just another passenger. She was the person who ultimately controlled the fate of every employee in the company. That's not possible," Patricia stammered, her voice barely a whisper. She's just a passenger." "No, Patricia," Jasmine said quietly, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions. "I'm not just a passenger. I'm the person responsible for ensuring that Atlantic Airways maintains the highest standards of customer service, operational excellence, and ethical conduct. I'm the person who signs off on policies that are designed to protect families, ensure safety, and create positive travel experiences for millions of people every year." The crowd around them had grown larger, with passengers from other gates beginning to drift over, drawn by the obvious drama unfolding at Gate 47. Cell phones were recording from multiple angles, capturing what was rapidly becoming a viral moment that would reshape conversations about discrimination in the airline industry. Marcus stepped closer to his wife, pride evident in his expression. For 15 years, he had watched Jasmine build her career from a junior analyst to the pinnacle of corporate aviation. He had seen her work 18-hour days, master complex international regulations, and earn the respect of industry leaders around the world. But he had never seen her power wielded in defense of their family like this. "Mom," Destiny whispered, her teenage eyes wide with realization, "you're about to fire her, aren't you?" Jasmine looked at her eldest daughter, seeing wisdom beyond her 15 years. "We'll see, sweetheart. First, I want to understand exactly how deep this problem goes." She turned back to Patricia, who was now visibly shaking. "Ms. Kellerman, I want you to walk me through your decision-making process this morning. I want to understand what led you to manually reassign my family's seats, separating our children, and placing our 8-year-old daughter alone among strangers." I didn't mean, it wasn't personal," Patricia babbled, her earlier arrogance completely evaporated. The flight was full, And we had some VIP passengers who needed seats together, and I thought I could just move a few people around. VIP passengers? Captain Williams interjected, his pilot's instinct for precision kicking in. I wasn't informed of any VIP passengers on this flight. Patricia's face grew even paler. They weren't officially VIP, but they were. They seemed like important people, and they specifically requested seats together in the premium economy section. Jasmine's expression remained neutral, but those who knew her well could see the storm building behind her eyes. And so you decided that their request was more important than keeping a family with young children together? I thought you wouldn't notice, Patricia admitted, the words tumbling out in a rush of panic. Most passengers just accept their seat assignments and don't complain. Most passengers don't have the power to shut down this entire operation, Marcus said quietly, speaking for the first time since the revelation. His voice carried the steady authority of a surgeon, but there was an edge to it that made everyone within earshot pay attention. Zoe, who had been quietly holding her father's hand throughout the confrontation, looked up at her mother with 8-year-old directness. Mommy, are you really the boss of the airplane people? Jasmine knelt down to her youngest daughter's level, smoothing her curly hair with infinite tenderness. Yes, baby. Mommy helps make sure that airplanes are safe and that families like ours are treated fairly when they fly. Then why was the mean lady trying to make me sit by myself? The innocent question from a child cut through the adult complexities of corporate hierarchy and discrimination, reducing the entire situation to its essential truth: a family had been mistreated, and the person responsible for preventing such treatment had been the direct victim of it. Jasmine stood back up, her resolve crystallizing into diamond-hard determination. The time for patience and diplomacy had ended. The time for consequences had arrived. Captain Williams, she said, her voice taking on the unmistakable tone of executive authority. I want you to personally escort my family to first-class seats. We'll be continuing our vacation as planned. Of course, Dr. Richardson, immediately. Patricia, Jasmine continued, turning to face the gate agent who had triggered this entire confrontation. You're suspended from duty, effective immediately. You'll be escorted by airport security to complete the necessary paperwork, and HR will be in contact with you regarding a formal investigation into your conduct. Please, Patricia begged, tears beginning to stream down her face. I have kids. I need this job. I made a mistake, but I can fix it. You're right, Jasmine replied, her voice steady but not unkind. You did make a mistake, but it wasn't an error in judgment or a simple oversight. You made a deliberate decision to discriminate against my family, and then you lied about it repeatedly when given multiple opportunities to correct the situation. The crowd around them had grown silent, everyone understanding that they were witnessing a moment that would have far-reaching consequences beyond this single incident. But Jasmine wasn't finished. The revelations were just beginning, and the full scope of her response would soon shake the entire aviation industry to its core. 2 airport security officers arrived at Gate 47 within minutes of Captain Williams' radio call, their presence adding an official gravity to the situation that made the gathered crowd of passengers realize they were witnessing something far more significant than a typical travel dispute. The officers, both experienced in handling delicate situations involving airline personnel, approached with professional caution. Officers Martinez and Chen, the taller of the two, introduced himself to Jasmine. We understand there's been an incident requiring our assistance. Jasmine nodded, her executive composure intact, despite the emotional toll of the morning's events. Thank you for responding so quickly. Ms. Kellerman will need to be escorted for processing related to a discrimination incident and falsification of passenger records. Patricia, overhearing the formal charges being referenced, began sobbing openly. Please, Dr. Richardson, I have 2 children at home. My husband lost his job last month, and we can't afford for me to lose mine too. I'll do anything to make this right. The plea for mercy hung in the air, creating an uncomfortable tension among the watching passengers. Some shifted sympathetically, understanding the desperation of someone facing financial ruin. Others, particularly those who had witnessed the entire confrontation, remained firmly supportive of consequences for discriminatory behavior. Jasmine studied Patricia's face for a long moment, seeing not just the gate agent who had mistreated her family, but a complex human being facing the destruction of her livelihood. However, her responsibility as a CEO extended far beyond this single incident. Miss Kellerman, she said quietly, I understand you're facing personal difficulties, and I genuinely sympathize with your situation. But what you did this morning wasn't just a mistake. It was a deliberate act of discrimination that could have put my children at risk and definitely caused emotional harm to my family. She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing. More importantly, if you're willing to treat the CEO's family this way when you don't know who we are, how many other families have you subjected to similar treatment? How many other children have been separated from their parents because you decided their needs weren't important? The question struck at the heart of the broader issue, and several passengers in the crowd nodded in recognition. This wasn't just about one family's vacation being disrupted. It was about systematic patterns of discrimination that affected countless travelers. Cameron, who had been quietly documenting the scene with his camera, stepped forward with teenage earnestness. "Mom, can I ask her something?" Jasmine looked at her 12-year-old son, curious about his perspective. "Go ahead, sweetheart." Cameron addressed Patricia directly, his young voice carrying surprising gravity. "Why did you think it was okay to separate us? Would you want someone to put your kids alone on a plane with strangers?" The simple, direct question from a child devastated Patricia more than any corporate reprimand could have. She sank into a nearby chair, her face buried in her hands. "I don't know," she whispered. I thought you were just another family complaining about seats." "Just another family?" Destiny interjected, her 15-year-old indignation flaring. "What kind of family deserves to be treated badly?" The teenager's question exposed the ugly truth that Patricia couldn't bring herself to articulate. She had made assumptions about the Richardson family based on their appearance, assumptions that had led her to believe they were less deserving of courtesy and accommodation than other passengers. Officer Martinez stepped forward, recognizing that the emotional confrontation needed professional management. "Ma'am," he addressed Jasmine, "we'll need to complete some paperwork regarding this incident. Would you prefer to handle this here or in a more private setting?" "Here is fine," Jasmine replied. "I think transparency is important in situations like this." She turned to address the crowd of passengers who had been watching the drama unfold. Many were still recording with their phones, and she knew that footage of this incident would soon be circulating on social media and news outlets. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice carrying the natural authority of someone accustomed to addressing large audiences, "I want to apologize to all of you for the delay this situation has caused to your travel plans. What happened here today is not representative of the values that Atlantic Airways strives to uphold." A middle-aged businessman in the crowd called out, "Are you really the CEO of this airline?" "I am," Jasmine confirmed. "And I want you to know that this incident will be thoroughly investigated, not just regarding Ms. Kellerman's actions, but to determine whether there are systemic issues in our training and policies that allowed this situation to occur." A woman traveling with her own children raised her hand. "Dr. Richardson, I've witnessed gate agents treat families poorly before, especially families that don't look like mine. Is this company going to do something real about it? Or is this just damage control?" The question cut straight to the core of corporate accountability, and Jasmine appreciated its directness. "Ma'am, you're asking exactly the right question, and I'm going to give you a commitment right here, in front of all these witnesses and cameras." She pulled out her phone and opened her notes app, speaking as she typed. "Within 30 days, Atlantic Airways will implement mandatory bias training for all customer-facing employees. Within 60 days, we'll establish an independent review board to investigate discrimination complaints. And within 90 days, we'll publish a comprehensive report on our family accommodation policies and how we're improving them." The crowd murmured approvingly, but Jasmine wasn't finished. "Furthermore," she continued, "I'm establishing a hotline that passengers can call to report discrimination incidents. These reports will be investigated by an external civil rights organization, not by our internal staff, to ensure objectivity and accountability." Captain Williams, who had been coordinating with ground crew to prepare upgraded seating for the Richardson family, returned with updates. "Dr. Richardson, we've prepared first-class accommodations for your family. The aircraft is ready for boarding whenever you are." "Thank you, Captain. But before we board, I have one more matter to address." She turned to Patricia, who was now flanked by the security officers but still seated, looking utterly defeated. "Miss Kellerman, your employment with Atlantic Airways is terminated, effective immediately. However, I'm not going to leave you without resources." Patricia looked up in surprise, confused by the unexpected turn. I'm authorizing a severance package that will provide you with 3 months of salary and full benefits coverage, Jasmine continued. Additionally, the company will pay for professional counseling to help you understand the impact of unconscious bias and discrimination. The unexpected compassion in the midst of consequences surprised everyone present, including Marcus, who looked at his wife with renewed admiration for her leadership style. "Why?" Patricia asked, her voice barely audible. "Because," Jasmine explained, "destroying your life won't undo the harm you caused my family, and it won't prevent future discrimination. But giving you the opportunity to grow and change might help you become someone who would never treat another family the way you treated mine." The profound moment of accountability mixed with mercy created a hush over the entire gate area. Passengers who had been angry at Patricia's actions found themselves reconsidering their desire for pure retribution, while those who had sympathized with her situation recognized the consequences were still necessary and appropriate. As the security officers began the formal process of escorting Patricia away, she stopped and turned back to the Richardson family. "Dr. Richardson," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I am truly sorry. You didn't deserve what I did, and your children didn't deserve it. I hope someday I can be the kind of person who would never even think of treating a family the way I treated yours." With that, she walked away with the officers, leaving behind a gate full of passengers who had witnessed something unprecedented. A powerful executive holding someone accountable while still showing them a path toward redemption. But Jasmine's work was just beginning. The real changes would happen in boardrooms, in training centers, in policy manuals and corporate culture shifts that would ripple throughout the entire aviation industry. The first-class cabin of Flight 847 felt like a sanctuary as the Richardson family finally settled into their seats, the morning's traumatic events beginning to fade into what seemed like a surreal memory. Zoe pressed her face against the oversized window, watching ground crews prepare for departure, while Cameron carefully documented their upgraded accommodations with his camera. Destiny had already connected to the aircraft's Wi-Fi and was showing her parents the social media explosion that was unfolding in real time. "Mom, look at this," Destiny said, tilting her phone screen toward Jasmine. "The hashtag Atlantic Airways discrimination is already trending on Twitter, and someone posted a video of your speech at the gate that has over 50,000 views." Jasmine scrolled through the comments, noting the mixture of support, outrage, and skepticism that always accompanied stories of corporate accountability. Some praised her handling of the situation, while others questioned whether real change would actually occur or if this was merely public relations theater. "Dr. Richardson," Captain Williams approached their row, his expression still carrying traces of the morning's shock. "I wanted to personally apologize again for what happened and to inform you that the crew has been briefed on the situation. Everyone aboard this aircraft is committed to ensuring you have an exceptional flight experience. Captain, I appreciate your professionalism, but I don't want exceptional treatment because of who I am," Jasmine replied thoughtfully. "I want every family to receive the kind of service you're providing us right now. That's the standard we need to achieve across the entire industry." Marcus reached over and squeezed his wife's hand, recognizing the weight of responsibility she was already feeling. What had started as a family vacation had transformed into a public moment that would define her legacy as a leader and potentially reshape industry practices for years to come. "You know what this means, don't you?" he said quietly. "There's no going back to being anonymous travelers. Every flight, every interaction, every decision you make will be scrutinized." Jasmine nodded, understanding the profound shift that had occurred in their lives. "I've been thinking about that. But maybe that's exactly what needs to happen. Maybe it's time for executives to experience their own services the way regular customers do." As the aircraft pushed back from the gate and began its taxi toward the runway, Jasmine pulled out her laptop and began composing what would become one of the most widely read corporate memos in aviation history. The document would detail not just the morning's incident, but a comprehensive plan to address systematic discrimination throughout the airline industry. High above the Rocky Mountains, Jasmine worked steadily on her laptop while her family enjoyed the luxury of first-class service. Flight attendants moved through the cabin with genuine warmth and professionalism, their treatment of every passenger reflecting the standards Jasmine had always hoped to see consistently implemented. Mrs. Richardson, the senior flight attendant, approached with a warm smile. "The captain asked me to let you know that we'll be beginning our descent into Honolulu in about 90 minutes. Also, I wanted to tell you that word has spread among the crew about what happened this morning, and we're all committed to ensuring that kind of treatment never happens again on any of our flights." "Thank you," Jasmine replied. "But I have a question for you. In your experience, how often do you see families treated the way mine was treated this morning?" The flight attendant's expression grew serious. "More often than any of us would like to admit, Dr. Richardson. Some gate agents and crew members make assumptions about passengers based on appearance, accent, or perceived status. We've all seen it, but the culture hasn't always supported speaking up about it." "That culture changes now," Jasmine said firmly. "I want you to spread the word among your colleagues that reporting discrimination isn't just encouraged, it's expected. And anyone who experiences retaliation for reporting such incidents will have my personal attention." As news of the morning's events continued to spread through social media and aviation industry channels, Jasmine's phone buzzed constantly with messages from board members, government officials, and fellow executives. The story had transcended the airline industry and was being discussed in broader conversations about corporate responsibility and systemic discrimination. The Hawaiian sunshine felt like a blessing as the Richardson family deplaned at Honolulu International Airport, but the tropical paradise couldn't completely wash away the morning's intensity. As they collected their luggage, Jasmine noticed airport employees and passengers recognizing her from the viral videos that were now circulating worldwide. A young Hawaiian woman approached them hesitantly near the baggage claim. "Excuse me, are you Dr. Richardson from the airline video?" Jasmine nodded, unsure what to expect from the interaction. "I just wanted to thank you," the woman continued, her voice emotional. "My family faced similar treatment on a flight to the mainland last year. My elderly grandmother was separated from us and placed in a middle seat between two strangers for a 6-hour flight, despite our having booked seats together. When we complained, we were told it was just the way things work. Seeing you stand up and demand accountability, it gives me hope that things might actually change." The encounter reinforced for Jasmine that the morning's incident was part of a much larger pattern of discriminatory treatment that affected countless families. Her response couldn't be limited to policy changes at Atlantic Airways. It needed to address industry-wide practices. As the family settled into their oceanfront suite at the Grand Wailea Resort, the events of the morning felt both distant and immediate. The children were excited to finally begin their vacation, but the gravity of what had occurred continued to resonate with all of them. "Mom," Cameron said as they sat on their private lanai watching the sunset, "do you think that lady will really change? Patricia, I mean." Jasmine considered her son's question carefully. "I hope so, sweetheart. People can change when they're given the right opportunities and support. But change has to come from within. I can provide resources and consequences, but I can't force someone to examine their own biases and prejudices." Destiny looked up from her phone, where she had been monitoring the ongoing social media conversation. "People are calling you a hero online, but some are saying you were too harsh, and others are saying you weren't harsh enough. How do you deal with everyone having different opinions about what you did?" "That's the reality of leadership," Marcus answered before Jasmine could respond. "Your mother made decisions based on principles and values, not on what would make people happy. Sometimes doing the right thing means accepting that not everyone will agree with your approach." Jasmine nodded in agreement. The goal isn't to make everyone happy. It's to create real, lasting change that protects families and ensures fair treatment for all passengers. That's going to require some people being uncomfortable with the process. Back in her corner office overlooking Chicago's downtown skyline, Dr. Jasmine Richardson reviewed the quarterly reports that detailed the transformation taking place throughout Atlantic Airways and its subsidiary airlines. The changes implemented following the Gate 47 incident had exceeded even her most optimistic projections. Customer satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs, particularly among families traveling with children. The mandatory bias training program had been completed by over 15,000 employees, with follow-up sessions scheduled quarterly. Most significantly, discrimination complaints had dropped by 78%, while reports of exceptional customer service had increased dramatically. The Independent Review Board had investigated 43 discrimination complaints in its first 6 months of operation, resulting in policy changes, additional training requirements, and in some cases termination of employees who demonstrated patterns of discriminatory behavior. More importantly, The board's transparency in publishing its findings had created accountability that extended throughout the industry. Patricia Kellerman had completed her counseling program and was now working as a diversity training coordinator for a nonprofit organization focused on workplace bias education. She had reached out to Jasmine several times, expressing gratitude for the second chance and sharing how the experience had fundamentally changed her understanding of discrimination and privilege. The reports from other airlines are interesting, Jasmine's chief operating officer noted during their weekly meeting. 3 major carriers have implemented similar bias training programs, and the Department of Transportation is considering making such training mandatory industry-wide. That's exactly what I hoped would happen, Jasmine replied. Real change can't be limited to one company. It has to transform the entire industry culture. 9 months after the Gate 47 incident, Dr. Jasmine Richardson found herself sitting before the House Subcommittee on Aviation, testifying about discrimination in commercial aviation and the need for federal oversight of airline customer service practices. Dr. Richardson, Congressman Williams addressed her, your experience at Chicago O'Hare has sparked a national conversation about discrimination in air travel. In your expert opinion, what federal actions are necessary to ensure all passengers receive fair and equal treatment? Jasmine leaned forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had not only experienced discrimination but had taken concrete action to address it. Congressman, I believe we need 3 key federal interventions. First, mandatory bias training for all airline customer service personnel, with federal oversight and standardized curriculum. Second, independent civil rights monitors at major airports to investigate discrimination complaints in real time. And third, significant financial penalties for airlines that demonstrate patterns of discriminatory treatment. Some critics argue that your proposals would increase airline costs and potentially raise ticket prices, another committee member noted. How do you respond to that concern? Congressman, the cost of discrimination, in terms of legal settlements, damaged reputations, lost customers, and human suffering, far exceeds the cost of prevention, Jasmine replied firmly. Moreover, treating all passengers with dignity and respect isn't an optional luxury. It's a basic requirement of operating in a regulated industry that serves the public. 2 years after their fateful flight to Hawaii, the Richardson family had adapted to their new reality as reluctant public figures in the fight against discrimination. Destiny, now 17, had founded a student organization focused on civil rights education and was planning to study law with a focus on transportation discrimination. Cameron, at 14, had compiled his photographs and videos from that morning into a documentary project that won his school's Social Justice Film Festival. 8-year-old Zoe, now 10, had become something of a celebrity at her elementary school, where her classmates knew her as the girl whose mom changed the airlines. She handled the attention with typical childhood resilience, though she still occasionally asked her parents why some people had been mean to their family, simply because of how they looked. Marcus continued his surgical practice while also serving on several nonprofit boards focused on healthcare equity. The experience had deepened his understanding of how discrimination affected all aspects of society, not just air travel. For Jasmine, the transformation had been both personal and professional. Atlantic Airways had become an industry leader in diversity and inclusion, with other companies regularly seeking her advice on implementing similar programs. She had been invited to speak at conferences worldwide, sharing the story of how a family vacation turned into a catalyst for industry-wide change. The incident at Gate 47 had ripple effects that extended far beyond airline policies. Universities began using the case study in business ethics courses, examining how individual actions can reflect and perpetuate systematic discrimination. Civil rights organizations pointed to the Richardson family's experience as an example of how privilege and power could be used to create positive change for others facing similar discrimination. Most importantly, thousands of families reported improved treatment when traveling, particularly families of color who had previously faced the kind of discrimination the Richardsons experienced. Flight attendants, gate agents, and other airline personnel consistently cited the Richardson standard when describing their commitment to treating all passengers with equal dignity and respect. The viral videos from that morning continued to circulate on social media, serving as a reminder that discrimination often happened in plain sight, and that real change required individuals with power and influence to take concrete action when they witnessed injustice. In her final interview about the incident, 2 years later, Dr. Jasmine Richardson reflected on how a moment of discrimination had transformed into a movement for change. I often think about what would have happened if we had simply accepted Patricia's treatment and boarded that flight with our family scattered throughout the aircraft, she said. My children would have learned that sometimes you have to accept unfair treatment, that speaking up doesn't matter, and that discrimination is just something you endure. Instead, they learned that you can demand better, that change is possible, and that people in positions of power have a responsibility to use that power to protect others. She paused, looking out at the interviewer with the same calm authority she had displayed that morning at Gate 47. Most importantly, they learned that their dignity and worth are not negotiable, regardless of who questions them or why. That's a lesson that will serve them far beyond air travel, and it's a lesson that I hope other families take from our experience. The Richardson family's story became more than just an account of discrimination overcome. It became a blueprint for how individuals could transform personal injustice into systemic change, proving that sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination is not just to demand better treatment for yourself, but to ensure that no other family ever faces the same treatment again. 5 years later, as Dr. Jasmine Richardson prepared to step down as CEO of Atlantic Airways to run for the United States Senate, industry statistics showed a measurable decrease in discrimination complaints across all major airlines. The Richardson protocols, as they had become known, were now standard practice throughout commercial aviation. Patricia Kellerman, now a sought-after speaker on unconscious bias and workplace discrimination, often ended her presentations with a simple message: everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of who they are or where they're going. And sometimes it takes losing everything to learn that simple truth. The gate at Chicago O'Hare, where everything began, now featured a small plaque installed by airport management that read, "Excellence in customer service means treating every passenger as if they were the most important person in the world, because to someone, they are." And somewhere in Hawaii, a family photo hangs in the Richardsons' home office, showing 4 smiling faces against an ocean sunset, taken on a vacation that began with discrimination but ended with transformation. A reminder that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to create light for others. Today, aviation schools across the country teach the Gate 47 case study as a masterclass in crisis management and ethical leadership. Young pilots and flight attendants learn about Dr. Richardson's measured response, studying how she balanced personal hurt with professional responsibility, immediate consequences with long-term solutions. The incident's influence extended beyond aviation into other service industries. Hotels, restaurants, and retail chains began implementing similar bias training programs, recognizing that discrimination could surface anywhere customer service intersected with unconscious prejudice. Corporate boards started asking harder questions about their company's treatment of diverse customers, knowing that in an age of smartphones and social media, every interaction could become a defining moment. International airlines adopted the Richardson protocols during training programs in over 40 countries. The story was translated into dozens of languages, becoming a universal example of how individual courage could catalyze institutional change. Perhaps most remarkably, a scholarship fund established in the Richardson children's names had supported over 500 students pursuing careers in aviation, transportation, and civil rights law, ensuring that the next generation of industry leaders would carry forward the lessons learned from one family's refusal to accept discrimination as simply the way things work. In a twist that surprised even Jasmine, Patricia Kellerman had become one of the most effective advocates for the changes implemented across the industry. Her unique perspective as someone who had perpetrated discrimination and then undergone genuine transformation gave her credibility that few others possessed when speaking to resistant employees or skeptical executives. "I was the problem," Patricia would tell training groups, her voice steady with hard-earned wisdom. "I made assumptions. I wielded small power badly. And I hurt a family because of my own unconscious biases. But Dr. Richardson showed me that accountability doesn't have to mean destruction. It can mean reconstruction." Their unlikely partnership in promoting industry reform had become legendary in corporate circles. Former enemies turned collaborators, working together to ensure that other families would never experience what the Richardsons endured, and that other employees would never fall into the trap of prejudice that had cost Patricia her original career but ultimately led her to discover her true calling as an agent of positive change. The story continues to resonate across generations. Cameron Richardson, now a documentary filmmaker in his 20s, released a feature-length film about systematic discrimination in travel industries that premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. The opening credits featured the original footage he captured as a 12-year-old at Gate 47, footage that had helped launch a movement. Destiny Richardson Williams, following her mother's path into law and public service, successfully argued her first discrimination case before the Supreme Court, citing the precedent established by the airline industry reforms that began with her family's experience. She often credited that morning at O'Hare with teaching her that justice wasn't just about winning cases. It was about changing systems. Zoe Richardson, now pursuing a doctorate in social psychology, focused her research on how childhood experiences with discrimination and advocacy shaped lifelong perspectives on justice and equality. Her dissertation examined hundreds of families who had faced similar challenges, documenting how different responses to discrimination created vastly different outcomes for both individuals and institutions. Dr. Jasmine Richardson's Senate campaign centered on transportation equity and civil rights enforcement. Her slogan, "Dignity isn't negotiable," drew directly from the lessons learned at Gate 47. She frequently reminded audiences that real change happened not in dramatic moments, but in the daily decisions of ordinary people who refused to accept that discrimination was simply the way things work. Even Marcus, initially the most private member of the family, had found his voice in advocacy. As president of the National Medical Association, he implemented bias training programs in hospitals nationwide, recognizing that the same unconscious prejudices that affected air travel could literally be matters of life and death in healthcare settings. The ripple effects continued expanding. A generation of children who had grown up hearing the Richardson story were now entering the workforce with fundamentally different expectations about dignity, respect, and accountability. They refused to perpetuate discrimination and demanded better from institutions that had previously operated with impunity. International human rights organizations began using the Richardson model as a framework for addressing discrimination in service industries worldwide. The case study was taught in business schools from Harvard to Tokyo, demonstrating how corporate leadership, when guided by moral courage rather than damage control, could transform entire industries. Most remarkably, the small plaque at Gate 47 had become an unofficial pilgrimage site for travelers who wanted to pay respects to a moment when ordinary people demanded extraordinary change. Airport staff reported that families would often stop, read the inscription, and use the moment to discuss with their children the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Patricia Kellerman, now in her 50s, had become a grandmother whose own grandchildren learned about bias and discrimination through stories of how their grandmother's worst mistake became her greatest teacher. She often told them that the most important lesson wasn't about avoiding discrimination, but about how to respond when you inevitably fell short of your own values. The annual Richardson Institute Conference on Transportation Equity drew thousands of attendees from around the world, creating a global network of advocates, policymakers, and industry leaders committed to ensuring that dignity and respect weren't luxuries reserved for the privileged few, but fundamental rights guaranteed to every traveler. And in a small office building in downtown Chicago, a nonprofit organization operated a 24-hour hotline for travelers experiencing discrimination. The walls were covered with thank you letters from families who had received help, photos from successful policy changes, and a single framed image, the Richardson family at Gate 47, standing together with quiet dignity while demanding that the world live up to its promises of equal treatment for all. The story that began with a family's vacation plans disrupted by prejudice had become a testament to the power of principled leadership, the possibility of redemption, and the truth that real change happens when people with power remember their responsibility to those without it. It proved that sometimes the most important journeys begin not when you reach your destination, but when you refuse to accept an unjust departure. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.